Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Later in the show, Pulitzer Prize winning author from Western Mass, Tracy Kidder, on his new book, Rough Sleepers. He'll be at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley next week.
And it's Live Music Friday. Our guests in studio, sort of, are Flora Reed and Philip Price from the Winterpills. But first...
Depending on where we're at, we duck back in a corner or in a basement.
Have a grand tasting.
No.
we don't. When we go to State Street, we go to the basement.
But with this new show covering the breadth and depth of the 413, we want to taste in all sorts of different locations, and we're here in Lenox. What's your name?
Joe Nejaime.
And what's your name?
Oh, I'm Xavier. Xavier Letteron.
This is Nejaime's Wine Cellars, and we're in Lenox and we're in Stockbridge.
It's fun to taste in the Berkshires.
I know, it's our first time in the Berkshires tasting things. We've been very 91-centric, so I was really adamant about trying to find a place in the Berkshires that we could taste.
It's a nice ride out here and everything. Big shout out to our director,
gorgeous day.
Tony Dunn, for setting all this up. The concept of our wine tasting in the Wine Thunderdome: 2 wines enter, 1 wine leaves.
2 men enter, 1 man leaves.
We taste 2 wines, we compare and contrast them, and we decide if we had to only choose one to go home with, which one it would be. And what we're doing, Xavier, that is interesting with this here at Nejaime's in Lenox is that you have brought us the wines blind.
Yes. So I figure the best way to make decision on wine versus, what's better than others or it's to taste them blind because we are otherwise full of prejudice, how the label look like. So this way they are as they are in your mouth and then you just can describe it.
That accent, Boston area?
Yes. The west part of the Boston area has the channel.
Where are you from really, originally?
Paris and Brittany over in France.
Uh-huh.
But I've been here 25 years, but I kept the accent. It helps in the business.
It sells more wine.
From Brittany, I want to bend your ear about cider.
Cider.
Yeah.
We do have very nice dry cider in Brittany.
Growing up in Paris, were you ensconced in the wine world from Jump Street? Like, did you grow up in wine, or is it something you developed over here?
I actually realized I grew up in wine when I moved into this country. The knowledge of what a good wine is versus a wine that is not as good is kind of pretty well spread in French families.
Uh-huh.
So you just realize that you know more than average, and then when you're French, you realize people expect you to know more than average. So you quickly learn because you don't want to look too dummy.
And what about you, Joe? How did you get into the world of wine?
I got into the world of wine more than 40 years ago in Stockbridge, where our original wine store is still. It was just a liquor store, but late 70s until today, my family was in wine. My parents bought a store in Stockbridge, and over the years, my brother and I developed it into a 3-store group, and wine was the growth area, although we have all alcoholic beverages and the foods and the cheeses. But wine is really the most interesting part. Your program actually is interesting because this makes it fun, and to do a focused blind tasting of wines at competition.
And demystifying some of the things. Everybody thinks wine is this fancy, highfalutin thing. It's a farm product. It's grape juice.
I like the idea of demystified. Being French and people always are afraid of French wine or Italian or German. They can't even read the label. So it's good to just remind people it's only wine, okay? Hey, just chill.
Yes, always chill, even your reds. And we're kind of letting these white wines unchill, warm up a little bit.
Yes. Yeah. So a white wine don't want to be drink cold unless it's maybe your Vino Verde or something extremely refreshing. Those deserve to warm up to get some more aroma.
This is our first white tasting.
I believe so.
Here we go. I'm glad we brought it. It's also the first warmest day in the Berkshires. This is the wine number 1.
This wine's golden in color. It looks a little bit, even in the glass, somewhat viscous.
Unctuous.
There's a little honey thing happening on the nose.
You guys are good, huh?
Okay.
So you were talking about what is coming into those wines. They're both white wine, okay? If you don't see the color, you shouldn't drink more. And I do wine blind tasting for fun with friends.
Yeah.
And we always ask, okay, where the wine come from and what varietal it is, and eventually how old the wine is. Mm-hmm. Those 3 things are not too hard to figure out when you're in the wine business, even you've been testing wine. And we most of the time are wrong, but we're most of the time not too far from what it is.
Cheers.
Cheers. Salud.
Cheers to spring.
To spring. Thoughts, Khalees?
This is fun. That honey thing still stays, but you get a little bit of apple, you get a little bit of almost honeysuckle leaf flowers. But dances.
There's a lot of melon, I think, in this. There's some real ripe fruit.
Good acidity on the finish
Yeah.
so that you're left with a clean palate.
Rich fruit concentration and yet some very bright notes that make it fresh and brisk.
Yeah.
It suggests sweetness, yet you're not left with residual sugar.
A lot,
that
of people,
acidity is
a lot of
great.
people will confuse sweet with fruit-forward wine. So
Right.
sometimes a dry wine has a fruit-forward profile, especially the one from the New World, American, South America. The fruitness will come across as sweetness, and people are prone to say, "Oh, it's a sweet wine." Well, it's definitely fruity, but not sweet.
Maybe we should hold this aside now and come back to it.
Love it. So this
different notes.
Yeah, the second
Oh, yeah.
wine is a much lighter color, more straw color, while the
But
other
it's
one.
got a little funk on it.
Good funk or bad funk?
I know.
Oh no, good funk.
Tether off, we gonna tether off the mother sucker.
This one is a lot less fruit forward. It's more reserved than the other
Okay,
one.
yeah,
So it's
yeah.
got some of those floral notes, but not big honeysuckle like floral
Yeah,
notes.
right. Yeah, good point, good point. I do feel a lot more minerality in
Oh,
this
that's
one.
Yeah.
definitely
You
true.
feel that flintiness?
Yeah.
All right.
What would you pair it with, food-wise?
Seafood.
Yeah, that's what
I would
was
love
with it.
something, maybe a saltier seafood, maybe oysters, and some sort of even like fried clams at a clam shack. This would be great.
Sure, yeah. There's enough acidity. It's dry. It would kind of work against that fried food.
What about you, Joe from
I would
Nejaime
go with,
in Lenox here?
Yeah, I would have this with all kinds of vegetarian fare.
Yeah.
This could work well with cheeses.
A nice camembert in
This
there, a
is
nice
what I was saying.
brie.
Like this room smells like really good soft cheese, and this wine really works with the smell of this room.
Yeah.
So I was thinking like triple creme.
If you serve some fish, it will come as lemon, or lobster. You drink this with lobster. It's like putting a little bit of lemon on your lobster. That's the way
Power
we,
of
we eat it
suggestion
to
is just, I can taste it right now.
But that's a good thing.
Oh yeah, that's the best thing.
That's why wines like these are often used as aperitif. It piques your appetite.
It literally makes your mouth
Yeah,
water. One of the
you-
ways to tell how acidic a wine is to open your mouth and lean over and see how much drool comes out.
Right?
They were not filming, huh?
Don't drool.
I just-
Let me bring the bucket.
We want them to let us come back. Don't drool.
Sorry, I drooled all over your Lenox floor. Well, these are both excellent. I have my thoughts as to what they both are.
No, we're talking.
Well, should we wait till Joe comes back? Is he coming back?
If you want, yeah, he's coming back. I think he was getting excited.
That's so excited he ran away.
Well, Joe being from a Lebanese family, they're very hospitable, okay? So they always, if you start opening wine, he's bring food.
Oh,
I was saying that's a Lebanese move.
all you had to
It's
do
like,
was mention
we
the
got-
soft cheeses and you ran
we
out and
gotta
got
have
them.
something.
Oh my word.
So,
Thank you.
We might have to pour more wine too.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
What a hard job we have, Khalees.
Hi, it's so hard.
See, the thing about wine tasting too is like both Khalees and my first inclination was to smell the cheese. Most people just shove stuff into their face. But the more you get used to like the finesse of trying to figure things out about wine and taste,
Exactly.
you go for a walk in the woods and you're like, oh, I smell the real honeysuckle and
Yeah.
I'm glad you bring this point because wine have three elements, okay? And one of the major elements of wine is aroma. And we do not give enough credit to our nose and to the aroma.
Oh my god, it's so good with this cheese.
It's so
the
good with
second
the
wine
cheese.
is like,
This is also the reason why you do not drink white wine cold.
the colder a thing is, the less you can smell it. It's
That's
just
right.
science.
Well, yeah,
the molecules
it's
are
like-
moving
it's exactly
slower.
the reason, yeah,
So
it's
when
too
Coors
tight.
puts an ad out that says it's the coldest beer in the world, you're
Yeah,
like,
that's
wow.
because they don't want you to taste it.
Exactly.
The banquet beer.
As usual in my history of wine tasting experiments,
got
the
one.
cheese is
Yeah,
almost
that one.
always the best
That one.
thing.
This is perfect.
Oh, it is perfect. Before we come up with what wine we like best here at Nejaime's Wine in Lenox with Joe and Xavier, let's guess what we think the wines are because we've tasted them all blind.
I'm not gonna be good at this.
Don't worry about it. You want me to just
Well,
guess?
You can guess.
Is the first wine New World?
No.
No.
Wow. Is it a Chardonnay?
Wow, boom, bingo. So it is a Chardonnay. The first one is a Chardonnay, hence maybe the fact that you think it was New World, but it's from Greece.
Wow. See, you're trying to trick us.
Okay, no, that's what I was like. So that's what I was.
Oh,
thinking.
that's what
like,
you
I
want to
was-
say, but you couldn't
like,
remember the
I'm
name
like,
of the
it
country?
Tastes, what it tastes this similarly too is that I got a chance to taste, I can't remember if it was Moldovan or Slovakian wines recently, and this shares a lot of those characteristics that they had in their whites.
This is a Greek wine from the Skouras winery in Peloponnese.
But interesting that you were mentioning Moldova, because in this month our feature is a particular region, and it's Eastern Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean, which is why Greece is among these. So I may have
Greece
given
is the
you a-
word.
There you go.
Okay, so then the mystery is second wine, not Chardonnay,
The second one is not Chardonnay.
No.
but it's Old World.
It is Old World.
Is it French?
It is not French.
No.
Is this like a weird Italian white varietal?
No, I know. Those ones are. When I don't know a wine, I'm like, it's something weird from Italy. They can come up with anything, those guys.
They'll call it a grape, they'll call it a place, they'll call it a grape named after a
and
place.
they will make a law after it, and they will sell it.
That's a lot
Eastern
of
European wine. It's a varietal that is known more for their sweet wine. Have you heard about the Tokai?
Oh!
Oh my.
Yeah, the sweet white wine from Hungary.
Yes.
Yes!
Called counterpart of the Sauterne over in
Yes.
Bordeaux. Sweet
Excellent,
and
delicious sweet wine. Like, you think you don't like sweet wines?
Yeah,
have
those-
a Tokai.
Yeah, yeah.
Have a Sauterne. And
Usually
your life will be changed.
Right on.
Sauternes are amazing.
Well,
You're right
they
about
use the grape ferment to make this sweet wine that is sweet due to a noble rot, okay?
Yeah. Which is my band name.
Noble rot. I like that.
I don't have a band yet, but when I do, it'll be called that.
That grape, if you harvest it before it gets moldy to make the sweet wine,
Which
you
is
can-
awesome, by the way. It's not a bad thing. It's a great thing.
Yeah, you can make regular white wine, and so this is a dry ferment. What I like about it, the soil is also volcanic.
And that's where the minerals came from. The flint.
Yeah, so this is an exciting wine because I think it's unusual and yet it's fun and it stays affordable as well.
From Hungary. Did we get to
Hungary,
that?
yeah.
It,
So-
it made me hungry when I was drinking it.
Yeah, there we go.
2 men enter, 1 man leaves.
Officially declare.
Okay, I love both of these, but this ferment is just, it keeps giving.
The Hungarian ferment is Khalees's vote. Xavier?
I do like the ferment the best.
Joe? You have to pick one to take home today.
I would drink the Greek Chardonnay.
Wow.
I like a white wine that has a little bit of age, a little maturity. I have a lot of Greek friends. If I don't pick the Greek wine, they'll come after
Yeah, they
me
come
with
after you.
knives.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Again, the cheese is the overall winner of everything. Always, whenever
that.
you wine taste.
Don't say that.
But I'm going with the ferment. My kind of acidity, my kind of reserved fruit. I'm a Francophile by and large when it comes to wine and my own personal palate. So I was tricked into believing it could be
There you
French.
go.
A Hungarian weirdo grape that not a lot of people drink very frequently. Not going to break the bank.
But do
It
not
may literally come home with me after this. I
do
believe
not
it will.
underestimate how much we like this Chardonnay.
Right.
This Chardonnay was really, really cool. Like, that's a hard decision
Yeah.
again.
And
Again.
it's a great alternative from a classic buttery, creamy, oaky Chardonnay,
Yeah.
and yet it's also an alternative from a Burgundy Chardonnay.
Yeah, it's the gateway drug between California and Burgundy.
Yeah, for me, I'll bring both to be honest, but you know.
They're reasonably priced.
How much are they? And then I'll bleep it out or
Oh,
code
they're
it.
like,
Almost a Tubman.
Almost a Tubman.
and that's before the discount that Nejaime always is willing to give. Every month we feature an area and by the bottle we'll give you a discount. So you come every month, you get something exciting to discover.
I can't tell you to do that, but they can.
We don't need another Pinot. Thanks again to Joe Nejaime and Xavier Letteron at Nejaime's Wine in Lenox. Coming up, Tracy Kidder on his new book, Rough Sleepers. You're listening to The Fabulous 413 on NEPM. Welcome back to The Fabulous 413. Our guest is Pulitzer Prize winning author Tracy Kidder. He'll be at an in-person event at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley this coming Tuesday. Let's start with him reading from his new book, Rough Sleepers.
And a warning, there is talk of suicidal ideation in this part of the book.
This is about the early days of the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program, and Jim O'Connell, who was the founding physician. It was obvious that he and his colleagues weren't addressing the many root causes of their patients' misery, but they were trying to figure out how to ameliorate some of the deepest suffering that lurked in the city. How do you treat HIV in a person who has no place to live? How do you treat diabetes in patients who can't even find their next meals? How do you treat physical illnesses in mentally ill patients and patients whose days and nights are ruled by the consumption of alcohol, the search for narcotics? At medical school, questions like those hadn't come up. He was discovering the role of homelessness doctor with a lot of help from Barbara McGinnis. What did continuity of care actually mean in doctoring homeless people? Around the time when Barbara let him use his stethoscope again, he found himself in an exam room at the Pine Street Shelter's clinic with a patient seemingly in crisis. The man, Bill, was weeping, saying, "I'm going to kill myself." The guy seemed genuinely desperate. Jim would have known what to do at Mass General, but he didn't hear. He hurried out of the room to find Barbara and asked her, "What's the process when you think someone's really suicidal?" She led Jim back to the exam room. "What's going on?" she asked Bill. "Bill's thinking of hurting himself," said Jim. Then Barbara sat down and leveled her gaze at the patient. "Bill, you know we don't use talk like that around here. If you're going to use that kind of language, I need you to go outside and talk in the alleyway. When you come in here, you're not suicidal." Jim was astonished. He couldn't imagine talking to a patient that way, especially one threatening suicide. And then Bill cleared up the whole matter. "Oh, okay, Barbara. I'm sorry. I'll be okay." The explanation was plain. The clinic did, of course, have a protocol for managing suicide threats. Indeed, Barbara was known for sniffing out the real cases, including those who made no threats. But she had known Bill for a long time, and she knew he talked this way periodically, and she understood that he didn't intend to harm himself this time either. Continuity of care in this context was a transaction. It was important that homeless people know their physicians well enough to trust them, and it was vital that the physicians and nurses spend the time it took to know each patient.
That was Tracy Kidder reading from Rough Sleepers, Dr. Jim O'Connell's urgent mission to bring healing to homeless people. Tracy Kidder is a literary journalist who won a Pulitzer Prize for his 1981 book, Soul of a New Machine. He famously chronicled the work of Dr. Paul Farmer in 2003 with his book, Mountains Beyond Mountains. That book traces the life of physician Paul Farmer with a focus on his work fighting tuberculosis in Haiti, Peru, and Russia.
With his new book, Rough Sleepers, Dr. Jim O'Connell's urgent mission to bring healing to homeless people, he follows another doctor through the streets of Boston who graduated from Harvard Medical School and was nearing the end of his residency at Massachusetts General Hospital when he made a decision to spend a year helping to create an organization to bring health care to homeless citizens.
That year turned into a career. Tracy Kidder will be doing an in-person reading on Tuesday, April 18th, 7 p.m. at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley, and Tracy Kidder joins us from his home in Western Mass right now. Thank you so much, Tracy Kidder.
You're welcome.
We spoke years ago on my former radio show after the Haitian earthquake, and you, as I mentioned, are what people refer to as a literary journalist. So you write these incredibly compelling books, many of which deal with the kind of characters like Dr. Paul Farmer in Mountains Beyond Mountains and Dr. Jim O'Connell, who are working with marginalized communities whose situations, like everybody's situation, frankly, are extremely nuanced. But what is it that draws you to characters like a Dr. Paul Farmer or like a Dr. Jim O'Connell?
That's a good question. I don't know. But, you know, I did somewhere along the line set a goal for myself to write about virtue in the world. I mean, I think it can be hard to do. Perhaps easier than vice, except that if you're going to spend years with a person the way I typically do, it wouldn't be much fun to hang out with a really nasty person, I guess. I don't know. I just think the cynics among us, particularly in the journalism trade, you know, they miss a whole part of the world. And the other thing about people like Jim and Paul is that they're not otherworldly. They have their faults. I think most people do have at least some altruistic tendencies, and they just happen to have more than others, I suppose. Jim did not, you know, set out to be a doctor to homeless people. He became a doctor pretty late at 30. He went to medical school at 30, and then he went to Harvard Medical School. He was very good at this stuff. He was a very smart guy, and he did very well. And he had residency at Mass General, which is top of the line, and then was accepted for a fellowship at Sloan Kettering in New York. He was going to be an oncologist. And they got waylaid by some eminent doctors at Mass General in the mid-'80s, 1980s, when homelessness had really begun. What's called the new wave of homelessness had really begun to be noticed, in places like emergency rooms and so on. Boston was one of the cities applying for grants to start these healthcare for the homeless programs. They needed a doctor, and Jim, they couldn't find one, so they asked Jim if he wouldn't. These eminence gris asked Jim if he wouldn't do it for just a year, and Jim got hooked.
Dr. Jim is still doing it today, and you have actually done a bunch of book readings with Dr. Jim O'Connell since the book's launch, right?
Yes.
It's incredible to hear his story. And you were mentioning he has his faults, but when you go through the pages of Rough Sleepers, and we're speaking with Tracy Kidder, the author of the book, who'll be at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley on Tuesday, April 18th, everyone that you chronicle in the book sort of lionizes Dr. Jim as a saint, including a lot of the homeless people that he's working with.
Yeah,
and you have a couple glimpses of him in what feels like a mood, perhaps. But what I kept thinking about while reading this book, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with the new television show Ted Lasso, but the character of Ted Lasso is this soccer coach who is so kind, but there is something brewing underneath it all, and yet he puts this veneer of kindness out all the time. And I get the same vibe from Dr. Jim O'Connell.
Where you're almost reminded of Kihei Kwan's character from Everything Everywhere All at Once, where kindness is what you fight with.
Yeah,
kindness is what you fight with. Jim is he's self-effacing and modest to a fault. There's a history to that, sad, I think, and he dislikes confrontation. Mm-hmm. He is extremely polite. He's very nice to be around, frankly. But I'm not even sure what it means to call someone a saint. He hates being called a saint. It's one way of kind of pushing what a person does aside. It's something to admire, but not to even imagine emulating. What this wonderful nurse that trained him said to him is, we don't want saints or zealots. We want just regular people who want to do a good job. Just try to make this a job that people like to do. And I think he's done that. Just to pause for a second over this. Imagine yourself. You're so talented. I mean, he was a salutatorian of his class at Notre Dame and so on. You had a hard time figuring out what you wanted to do. You finally figured out you really wanted to be a doctor. You go to school to be a doctor. You get really good at this art of medicine. And then you're handed a bunch of patients who need you more than anyone else in the city where you're working. No one else needs doctors like they do. And you're able to provide that, along with your colleagues, to invent a whole system for providing medicine. That's probably better medicine, by the way, than the middle class gets in Boston. And they're tremendously grateful for it. It sounds like a pretty good job to me.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think it requires a saint to do it. I really don't. It was a demanding job and all that, but some people really like working hard, and some people really like working hard serving other people. I suppose ultimately that's a selfish act. It makes you feel good. But I just think the saintly stuff is nonsense. Now there's a big difference. He and Paul Farmer were friends, by the way.
Wow.
Well, Paul was younger, but they sometimes were on panels together. And Paul would say, poor Jim, he never got more than a mile away from where he went to medical school. And then Paul would add, but he deals with the same things I see in Haiti.
Yeah.
Rwanda, Peru, you name it.
Paul Farmer, born in North Adams, I believe, right?
Yes, he was.
Yeah, so there's a connection there too.
Right, but what Paul was saying is that homelessness in Boston, this horror exists right here in the shadows of these great medical institutions of ours. But I wanted to say something else about Paul and Jim. Jim hates being called a saint. Both guys were often called saints. Paul kind of liked it.
Paul has passed away, so I do I hope that he has found his sainthood in the great beyond, and I have no doubt that if anybody has, it's probably Dr. Paul Farmer.
He did a huge amount for poor people in the world.
Coming up, more with Pulitzer Prize winning author from Western Mass, Tracy Kidder. We'll hear about his take on the concept of housing first and why it's not always the answer people are looking for when trying to end homelessness.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on NEPM. Speaking with Tracy Kidder, the author of Rough Sleepers, Dr. Jim O'Connell's urgent mission to bring healing to homeless people.
You've said when we were looking for a passage to read that there's nothing simple about anything we could excerpt, but I think that you've done a really good job of simplifying something that is a pretty complicated problem into some base components. And for those who haven't necessarily read the whole thing, what are some of those base components that I think are really easy to identify with? I think that this dovetails a little bit with your criticism of Housing First.
Well, let me just explain. I think Housing First is a wonderful idea. It has served some people really well. But what the problem is, Housing First is based on two basic principles. One is get people housed, but the other one is support them. Homeless people in America represent a huge spectrum. There are many people who just need housing and would do just fine as long as the housing is decently situated. Bad housing can be lethal too.
Yes.
And we know that from that wonderful study, that awful study that was done in Boston some time ago, where, if you go from one subway station in Charles Street to the subway station in Mattapan, if you take those regions, you lose about 30 years of life expectancy.
You have a similar problem in Springfield too, with
Yes.
the mold issues and the air quality issues.
But I guess what I'm saying is that with decent housing, most people who experience homelessness at some time or other during a period of a year would do fine, probably. But there's this group of chronically homeless people, and especially those who choose to sleep outside, a very small group in Boston, but a very endangered group, and a very large group in most other locales. Those people, in many cases, have really honed skills for living outside, but coming inside is really, really difficult for them. One difficulty is if you have a substance use disorder, as it's called, if you're addicted to heroin or now fentanyl, when you come inside, that doesn't end. Loneliness takes over. Jim and his wife, when after the introduction of Housing First enabled them to get some of their rough sleepers housed, kept going to places where patients had died. And in some cases that was a good deal because those patients were very sick. That was a good outcome. But in many cases it was unexpected and it was daunting. And I think it made Jim and his team realize that you can't have one without the other, really, particularly if you're dealing with chronically homeless people. They need a lot of support.
It is remarkable how you describe some of these rough sleepers, as you call them in your book, Tracy Kidder, rough sleepers, who are spending the majority of their time outside. And then when they do receive homes, sometimes they've done things like set up a tent inside their home because that's the life that they know. So people who aren't as ensconced in this world and studying the perils of homelessness and the dangers of it might just think, get them a house, get them going, and that's it. But there are no simple solutions that seem to come from this book. While it's a delightful book in so many ways, getting to know the characters, like Dr. Jim O'Connell or like Tony, the character of Tony that you describe from the North End, there's no simple solutions for any of them. It just feels like the work is the work.
Medicine is not the solution to homelessness. Any solution to homelessness would have to start with enormous increase in amount of housing available. Housing is essential, not sufficient. Jim's program does, and his street team do a lot of work on housing, but it's not really their job, and they can't take it all on. And in a town like Boston, as in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, you name it, gentrification, at least the enormous rise in housing prices, has made it much, much more difficult to get people housed. And all of that said, there are so many other things that feed chronic homelessness, from the criminal justice system to bad educational systems, almost non-existent system for dealing with mental health, awful child abuse. I mean, you see all of these things, all of this in the histories of these patients. The one thing I will say, however, that medicine can do, and that the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program is doing admirably, I think, is relieving misery. Relieving some of the worst misery in the city. And that's never a waste of time. I remember the other night I was signing books with Jim in Brookline, and a couple came up. Jim was dealing with someone else, and they were talking to me, and they said that the man said that his brother had been homeless and had died. And I, began talking to him about that. And he said he didn't really know what the basic problem had been, but he then sort of gestured toward Jim and he said, but I'll tell you one thing, that man made my brother's life infinitely better than it had been. And I think that's something worth remembering. What's going on in the world now, what's going on in America, I mean, there are a lot of really interesting projects being undertaken. A lot of really good and dedicated people are working to try to do something about this, what I think of as a national disgrace. And I think, as Jim once put it, What's going to be necessary is a mosaic of efforts. Medicine would be one, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that has to be done. I think that if we ever did get homelessness stopped, and I mean both the creation of new homelessness and dealing with the people, I mean helping the people who already are homeless, getting them out of this dilemma, we would have a fundamentally better country. I don't know that we're on that kind of track right now, but it's nice to imagine, I guess. In the meantime, I mean, the way Jim put it once was, this is what we do while we're waiting for the world to change.
Speaking with Tracy Kidder, the author of Rough Sleepers, Dr. Jim O'Connell's urgent mission to bring healing to homeless people.
There is an interesting sense of community, again, in the way we don't necessarily think about it in this book with the unhoused people and with the work that Dr. Jim is doing. Can you speak to that community just a little bit?
A little bit. I think one of the biggest burdens of homelessness, one of the great afflictions, is loneliness. By and large, and by the way, one of the reasons I don't use terms like unhoused much or talk about people experiencing homelessness is I think they understate how awful this problem is. To some degree, that sounds like fairly comfortable intellectuals finding delicate ways to describe other people's suffering and without actually doing much for those other people. But leaving that aside, I mean, loneliness is an enormous problem. Maybe enormous problem in America, but it's particularly big for homeless people, particularly once they get housed. A lot of times, Jim's patients would get evicted from their first housing because they'd invite all their friends inside. It was so lonesome in there. Like, as you said, there was this one fellow who just couldn't sleep, so he went outside and he made a recording of all the noises of the streets at night, and he would use that as his lullaby. One wonderful woman I wrote about who had been out in the streets for, off and on for 30 years, just couldn't figure out what to do inside. She would talk to her refrigerator, she said. I could tell you story after story of that sort. But, they're not different from many other people. They're pretty gregarious, and out on the street, they do have a community, a raucous community sometimes, and it's also, they can get into terrible fights now and then. The fellow I wrote about, Tony, was the glue, I felt, among a whole bunch of the rough sleepers in Jim's patient panel. I remember one day when he was trying to locate somebody, the mother of some kid who had just left her kid in this place where all the rough sleepers were hanging out, Mousy Park. Oh, he made a call to one guy, somewhere downtown, who called another guy, who called another guy. There was this incredible web of people who all knew each other, and they had cell phones, actually. Tony never was able to keep one for long. So you sense that there was really quite a community there. And there were other occasions when that became really obvious. And many of those people, the real center was Jim, and Jim and his team, not just Jim. I'm afraid that's one of the errors of my book, but it's sort of necessary ones that I make it seem like he's the whole deal.
Well, I think you do an excellent job in the book of not just shining a light on Jim. There's a tremendous amount of a light shined on Barbara McInnes, who even goes on to have a shelter named after her passing, how influential she was on the life of Dr. Jim, and how you can see how Dr. Jim's interactions with this community that you just spoke of, with maybe Tony as like the linchpin connecting the rough sleepers together. It's a remarkable glimpse and a beautifully written snapshot into a very hard issue that there's no easy solutions that come through in the book. But the one thing that really stuck out to me about Dr. Jim O'Connell in particular was that bartending was the school where Jim learned most of what he needed to know about how to interact with this community, apart from the medicine that he then brought to the community. That was what gave him an entree into this community that had otherwise not wanted to participate with the medical system.
It was part of it. I mean, he will say that one of the things he's very good at is listening. He claims he learned that while being a bartender. That may well be true. I think he probably had some predisposition for it anyhow, but he will say that bartending was the perfect training for this job. He said, because if you're not willing to sit and listen to people who are talking at you for quite a while, not always coherently, you can't do this job.
Facts.
I like it. It's a perfect training.
Exactly. Tracy Kidder is the literary journalist who won the Pulitzer Prize for the 1981 book Soul of a New Machine. His new book is Rough Sleepers, Dr. Jim O'Connell's urgent mission to bring healing to homeless people. Tracy Kidder will be doing an in-person reading on Tuesday, April 18th at 7 p.m. at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley. Thank you so much, Tracy.
You're welcome. Nice to talk to you again.
It's Live Music Friday. Coming up, Flora Reed and Philip Price from the Winterpills. They play at the Parlor Room in Northampton on Monday. And they play the Parlor Room in Northampton for you in just a minute.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. I'm Monty Belmonte.
I'm Khalees Smith.
On Fridays, we like to have live music by the studio. It's been really fun since we started this show back in February, but
This week, our studio is being deconstructed so that it can move down the road to our new home on 44 Hamden. So
hopefully we'll have live music live in the actual studio again next Friday. But instead, this time we decided to come to somebody else's home base and studio. We're at the Parlor Room in Northampton with Flora and Philip of the Winterpills. Flora Reed, Philip Price, who are playing Monday in this very room with Great Lake swimmers.
yeah, it's going to be a good time, I think.
I think so too. Can we hear a song, you two? Thanks for doing this.
Oh, you're very welcome. We'd
Our
love to.
pleasure. We're going to do one that's, this is from a solo record I did during the pandemic when the band couldn't do much, but we've been playing it as kind of a duo anyway.
Yeah, and you, we should mention, you are a married duo, so it was really easy for you to have a COVID kind of
Collaboration.
bubble, right?
Yeah,
Nothing was easy, but yeah. But yeah. And we're a duo opening on Monday with Great Lake Swimmers, so this will be,
yeah.
we'll probably
play this one.
Yay.
All Lies.
How do you shift tone between the songs that you write for Winterpills, the songs that you write for yourself, and the songs that you write as a duo?
I just kind of decide they're going to go in one box or another.
Or I will really push
Yeah,
and say,
yeah.
I'd like to take this
certainly-
song. Could I do that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that said, right now I'm really actively trying to write songs for the band, which the band hasn't really gotten around to yet. We're getting to it soon, but we have plans. But
Exciting!
Yeah, it's exciting because, you mentioned jokingly when we came here, it's nice to be doing things like this again. It's one thing when you're married to somebody in the band, then you're going to focus on a duo thing, but when the band can all actually get back together safely, it's a great thing. I'm interested in knowing, you both had solo careers, or you were both in other bands before Winterpills, and I always forget, and forgive me because we've known each other for a very, very long time now, but what came first, the Winterpills or the relationship?
Winterpills.
Yeah.
But just barely.
By like a few weeks.
Yeah.
Or no, you were with Dave and Dennis. You guys were considered
No, that's true.
Winterpills
The first
as a trio.
Winterpills gig didn't have Flora in it. And we did like 2 shows without Flora. But I think the first one wasn't even called Winterpills. It was just Philip solo something with backing musicians. And then it was Winterpills, and then you joined, and we had the first gig with you, which was at the Brass Cat in East Hampton. And that was the first full band with you. And I just remember being like very special night. Like it really just kind of cemented everything to be doing that live in front of everybody.
So were you like,
I felt
this
like
is
the
my
band
new
was really
girlfriend and
important.
now she's part of the band?
Well,
How did that go?
no, band
It was a little
first.
on again, off again
And
thing.
then we were like, maybe is it the best idea for us to like be a couple? And we tried to put the brakes on it for like 2 weeks.
We made a political
We're
decision,
like,
you know.
this is gonna be our like last date. Let's like go to see magnetic fields. At the
Oh, nice.
cabin.
That's a good last date.
And
She
I'll
made her
make you
amazing
dinner.
frittata,
We made you
and
a
then we
frittata.
saw Magnetic Fields, and by the end of that night, we're like, let's just keep going.
No,
that doesn't sound like a last date to me.
Sounds
It's
good
all
like
in
a right in the
theory.
middle date.
Exactly. That's the plywood ramp to getting comfortable.
Yeah. And now you have a 4-year-old who's in the other part of the parlor room hanging out with us
He's right
here.
over there watching Peppa Pig.
Yeah.
Who rolled over for the first time in this very room.
Oh my God.
On
Wes-
camera.
On-
Stage.
Wow.
For a video that you were
for
shooting
all,
that Khalees was in.
Come on, world.
Also worth noting, Parlor Room is the home base of Signature Sounds Records, which grew out of the offshoot of the radio station we were previously at, WRSI, when Jim Olsen left there, started this record label. Tons of wonderful bands that you've heard of have come out of that record label, and more to come this year. Moved from his house to this downtown location in Northampton that was also a listening space, and now has morphed into a co-op. But your offices of Signature Sounds, where both of you also work, are in this same building.
Yeah, talk about all your eggs in
Yeah,
one basket.
It's like a large basket.
Did you get involved in Signature Sounds because you were on the label, or was it the other way around?
I've been at Signature Sounds for a very long time. And I'd worked at the label for 2 or 3 years before Winterpills recorded our first album. Jim was like, I'd love to check it out. And he listened to it, and then he gave us a record deal back when they were still record deals with advances and
Yeah,
all
right.
of that. And we went to
It's a lot more informal now.
we all went to Packers
This
and
is
like
no money.
celebrated our first advance. But
For Reed and Philip Price of Winterpills, who will be performing as a duo with Great Lakes Swimmers in the very room where we're recording this live Music Friday for the Fabulous 413, the Parlor Room in Northampton, Monday.
You just announced the dates for the Arcadia Folk Festival, but that's the third festival that Signature Sounds produces. You want to talk about all of the awesome things you bring into the area?
I'm also a publicist at Signature Sounds, and so we produce the Green River Festival, the Back Porch Festival, which had a whole new format this year. Usually we just have shows here and at the Academy and maybe one other place, but this year we did 9 venues in town, and it was like a little mini South by. It went
Loud
great.
Festival is more like a quiet festival.
Yeah.
Loud
had that
Festival
vibe
was
of
before
people-
my time, so I don't really know
Right.
what that festival was.
It was
The Loud Festival.
It was a alt rock festival all around Northampton, and kind of people running around the streets like I got to get from one venue.
It
to
was fun to
another.
watch that, people running around the streets in
it was
Northampton.
like
It felt
that.
really
It was-
vibrant, and
it
it was
felt
in the
great.
cold weather, too. So.
Yeah. So yeah, Back Porch, Green River, and then yes, Arcadia Folk Festival, which is one of my favorite days of the year. It's at the beautiful Arcadia Wildlife Sanctuary in East Hampton. It's been beautiful.
You bring some really fantastic acts for all of those, and you can see some of that at signaturesoundspresents.com. And, put it on your calendar. Get ready to see all the really cool things.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because we are looking at the banners of Parlor Rooms past, and you had an interesting assessment of one of the particular posters from a year past on here.
This is the second time that you're playing with Great Lakes Swimmers.
Yeah, well, here. So we did a tour with them in Canada in 2014, I think it was. It was really fun, and they're lovely folks. Tony's a sweet guy and a really talented songwriter, and we're looking forward to seeing him again. We haven't seen him for a good while. This horrible gap, the pandemic gap, there were many plans that never came to fruition, including doing more shows with them. So it's going to be really nice to see our Canadian buddies again.
Yeah.
Well, should we hear another song?
We should absolutely hear another song.
We're having Live Music Friday at the Parlor Room on the Fabulous 413 today with Flora Reed and
also-
Philip Price.
Isn't it wine o'clock? Damn it, where are
Oh, yeah. Well, we've already been there, done that.
we? Today?
Yes.
So this is one of those songs I mentioned where this is from our last full band album, Love Songs. You sang lead on it, and then
2016, which is ridiculous.
it's ridiculous.
We all lost a few years in there, didn't we?
More than a few, I think.
And then just recently, I advocated for changing it up
she
and
just
said, "Could
took
I
it.
just sing it?"
Just,
And
I'm taking this one.
you're like, "Sure."
2, 3.
At the end of time, there's a friend of mine took me at my word on the private line, and the sun was round as a dandelion, followed me out of grace. Followed me out of grace. Push you off the wall, and you fall, and you hold me down, and you push around. I heard every sound as you fell and drowned. Followed me out of grace. Followed me out of grace. Come on, wander away. Where's your fiery spade? Now's your time to shine. It's the afterlife. You seduce all your friends on their wedding nights. Followed me out of grace. Followed me out of grace. Followed me out of grace.
Forgot my harmonica.
Flora Reed and Philip Price of Winterpills playing at the Parlor Room where we are right now on Monday with Great Lake Swimmers. Another shout out to the time Philip Price came out on one of our early shows to do a polar plunge. Did you go back again?
Yeah, I would.
Thanks for doing this with us.
Oh, anytime. Thank
It's
you for
great
having us.
fun.
Thanks again to Philip and Flora from the Winterpills. You can hear a bonus track of them covering a song from the band Low if you follow NEPM on social media.
Next week in the Fabulous 413, 420 is on the way. So we'll get into the weeds with Six Bricks Cannabis of Springfield about the industry and equity and their award-winning strains.
You might be hungry after that, so Pizza Quest Volume 3 hits the Berkshires.
And illustrator Jarrett Krasoska joins us to chat about his latest graphic memoir, Sunshine, and his live reading at the Academy of Music Northampton.
Of which Monty will be a part. Our director is Tony, lifting boxes and taking names done.
Our engineer is Betsy, trapped on Main Street forever Cordis.
Our technical tree. Oh, that's so terrible, but it's so true. Our technical team is Bart, Out of Phase, Rankin, Kara, The Eye of the Storm Foster, and Punk Rock Dubé, holding it down.
Musical thanks to Spouse, Happy Valley Guitar Orchestra, Mal Devisa, Gaslight Tinker, Suitcase Junket, Tina Turner, and Winterpills.
I'm Police Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte.
We'll see you on Monday on the Fabulous 413.